Charles Babbage was the son of a wealthy banker. He was Lucian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge University. He was a Fellow of the Royal Society, a respected economist and amateur playwright, the archetypal polymath, known to everybody who mattered in Victorian London. But it all went wrong. When he died 130 years ago, he was uncelebrated and unloved. No one came to his funeral.
Forasmuch as it hath pleased Almighty God of his great mercy to take unto himself the soul of our dear brother here departed, we therefore commit his body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes.
In life, Babbage was a man who mingled with the glitterati of the Victorian intelligentsia. In death, he was abandoned by all but his closest relatives, a far cry from his remarkable and full career.
Blessed be the name of the Lord.
He immersed himself in the study of biblical miracles and spent months calculating that the chances of being raised from the dead were 1 in 10 to the power of 12. Weird. But then this was a man who once baked himself in an oven at 265 degrees Fahrenheit for exactly 4 minutes to find out what would happen. Then, when he'd cooled down, he invented the Greenwich time signal. One afternoon, for fun, he went to the London borough of Marylebone and counted all the broken window panes. There were 462. And then he drew up a chart detailing the precise cause and type of every single break. Well, how about this one? One day he was lowered into Mount Vesuvius because he wanted to know how hot lava was. Babbage was a complete number junkie. He was obsessed with order, he was obsessed with maths, he was obsessed with tabulation. Every part of his life had to be put in a neat, ordered, structured chart. What Babbage needed was a machine. And the machine he eventually built to fuel his thirst for order was what he called his difference engine. It was what we today might call a computer. It was what his Victorian audience called a miracle.
Is to build another iron ship, even larger.
Babbage publicised his invention at the soirees he held for the great and the good of Victorian London. Everyone from Darwin to Brunel to Charles Dickens and Mary Shelley were guests at Mr. Babbage's dinner table.
Drowning would be the very last thing I'd grab.
These were the Victorian opinion formers, men of science and politics, the people who mattered.
One will simply embark at Southampton at one end and then walk to America at the other.
And while the diners were dazzled by the wit and erudition to be had, the real reason they were there was for the hard sell.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you please.
Babbage had only built a demonstration piece, a working model of the difference engine. If he was to complete the project, he needed backers.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is a machine that can perform miracles. Observe, if you will. The machine displays number 2. When I crank the handle, lo and behold, number 4.
Bravo.
And another turn?
6.
Indeed, my dear, number 6. And what would happen?
At the time, the idea that a machine could be instructed was a radical concept. It seemed to Babbage's Victorian audience that what they were watching was a machine almost capable of thought.
Another turn.
Babbage was so far ahead of his time.
One more turn?
It's hardly surprising that his guests found it hard to keep up.
129?
You've broken it, Babbage.
Not broken, sir. Engineered. Before you came, I set the machine to jump to 129 when it reached 12. I made it happen.
Though his guests couldn't possibly have understood how the device worked, what they did realise was its potential. Babbage had created a machine that could change the world. In the mid-1800s, the British Empire ran not on tea, but on tables. There were mathematical tables for everything, calculating insurance premiums, pension entitlement, and most importantly, navigation. Trouble was, there were errors, lots of them. And things could go badly wrong. Ships bound for Manila ended up in Hong Kong. The empire was running aground on the slip of a computer's pencil.
Well, there are engineering applications, we all know that, but what of the rest of mankind?
Mr. Babbage's marvellous machine offered an end to human error. The difference engine would calculate and print out the vital tables, eliminating mistakes all the way through the process.
And the computer will be released from his life of drudgery.
Brilliant, Babbage. Quite brilliant.
For once, we can actually say the British government knew a winner when they saw one. Even though Babbage only showed them this, a small part of the machine, the Exchequer responded by giving him a cheque for £17,000. And that's what it would have cost back then to buy 2 warships. So here we have Babbage. He's at the height of his powers. He's rich, he's connected, he's popular, and he has the funding to change the world. And he made a complete Horlicks of it. First, he fell out with the one man in the country capable of making the machine, his engineer, Joseph Clement. Babbage claimed he was being ripped off. Clement walked out. Next, he changed his mind about the design and started from scratch on an even bigger, better machine, the imaginatively named Difference Engine 2. Finally, Babbage ran out of money, and the project ground to a halt. The Difference Engine was never made. The money stopped, and then the ridicule started. Even the Prime Minister, Robert Peel, had a dig, saying that if the engine were ever to be built, it should be set to calculate its own usefulness. Oh, how they laughed. Babbage's groundbreaking machine was dismissed by a weary wave of the Chancellor's hand. In the end, it was even claimed that the ridiculous crate of cogs would never have come to anything anyway. But in 1991, to mark the bicentenary of Babbage's birth, engineers at the Science Museum did build the cogwheel brain. And it did work. This is a beautiful piece of engineering. Now what you do is you set the equation or the piece of maths that you want to do on these cogs here. Then you turn this handle and the answer comes spewing out on this piece of paper here. And that's it. Human error eliminated. All the men with pencils eaten and spat out by this brass and gunmetal. The machine's accuracy was down to what Babbage called the unerring certainty of mechanism. The idea was that the position of the cog, unlike a thought, cannot be misinterpreted. Don't think, however, that the Difference Engine was just some kind of fancy pocket calculator. I mean, you couldn't turn that upside down and snigger at the word boobs, for example. And don't think either that it would be stumped if you tried to give it something more difficult than 34 to the power of 7. This thing can do ferocious calculations, stuff like this. Now, these are ballistic equations, and that's important because when the Americans got their first computer in the 1940s, the first thing they did with it, the first thing, was work out how far a projectile would go out of a gun and where it was going to land. They made gunnery tables. So, if Babbage had made this in 1850, the First World War would have lasted 25 minutes? No, really, think about it. Gun, trench, weight of projectile is known to you, turn the handle a few times, bye-bye Fritz. Babbage recognised the need for even more powerful machines and continued designing mechanical computers. He came up with what he called the analytical engine, which worked in almost exactly the same way as a modern electronic computer. But by this stage, Babbage had run out of people who took him seriously, and so the device, like his difference engines, remained on paper. Charles Babbage gave the world many things. Gave the theatre coloured lighting for a kick-off. And he left the railways with 2 different types of cowcatcher. But alas, he produced no brass brains. So the chance of a Victorian information age was extinguished. So what if the difference engine had been made in the 19th century? Well, the empire would have been even more efficient, and that would have made Britain even richer. And that would have meant the First World War probably wouldn't have started in the first place. And the Titanic wouldn't have been so fatally flawed, and the Hindenburg wouldn't have crashed. The list is quite simply endless. Unfortunately, however, Babbage's genius went with him to his grave. And it wasn't until the middle of the next century, 80 years later, when the men with pencils were really up against it, that the need for a mechanical computer surfaced once again.